Good afternoon, everyone. In this short video, I'm going to talk to you about pivot tables. What I'd like to cover in this video is what I describe basic pivot functions. So after listening to this video, you'll have an understanding of the fundamentals or basics of working with data, getting into a pivot, why you might do that, and how you edit it. It's not going to cover everything because there's quite a lot in pivot tables, but it's enough to get you going. So I'm going to start by looking at the data that I have. So you'll see here I've got a data set including countries, regions, population, and GDP in US dollars. So what I've done is I've selected 50 different countries, multiple regions, their population, their GDP. So this will give us some data that we could work with. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the pivot table. So you can see here, I've got a tab here with my data. I'm going to use the Control A function. And what that does is it highlights everything in my pivot table or all of the data that I want to include. Be careful with this one because it's a really easy thing to do. It's really easy to miss data. So say, for example, I had a data set here and there was a blank line. If I use the Control A function, it's going to highlight everything up to that blank line and then nothing below it. So I always say to people, just be a bit careful when you're selecting your data because it's so easy to miss something. And then obviously any data or analysis that you do based on that will be missing that data. So just be careful with that. So I'm happy that I've selected everything that I need. I'll go to the top ribbon, go to Insert, select Pivot Table. What Excel is asking me here is, where do you want this table to appear? So the default option is a new worksheet. I would recommend that because that means that your table is going to be in a separate worksheet and it's just going to be easier to work with. And also, if you plan to share this pivot with somebody, it's separate. You can just either hide all the columns or all the tabs within your workbook, share the workbook, or you can just extract that workbook and just share that with somebody. So it just keeps it cleaner. So I'd recommend doing that. If you want to include it with your data, then you do have the option to use existing workbook and you can put your table just in that workbook. So I'm going to take the new worksheet for this example. What happens is it creates a new sheet and it brings me into the pivot wizard. So you can see here that it's a blank sheet, no data selected. So on the right hand side, I've got my fields. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to select my region. And all I'm doing here is I'm just clicking my mouse on the region. And then I'm going to select the GDP. So that's bringing the data. Now, what you'll notice is I have just clicked on those buttons, but Excel has made a decision. So what Excel has done is it said, I think regions should be shown in rows, and I think that GDP is a value. So I'm going to return that. You'll also notice that it has made a view on what type of value it is. So if I click on the drop down arrow here, what I can do is go into value field settings. And here I've got a couple of options. So for example, if I wanted to count the number of countries in my data set, I can do that. And then what I can do is I can pull that through again and I can have a sum of it. So this is something you might do if you're presenting a lot of information and you want to provide some kind of scale so people understand within that sum or that total that I've included, I've got X amount of countries. So that might be helpful. I'm going to actually take that out. So if you want to take something out of a pivot table, just drag it, take it out, and it's gone. So the other thing I'd like to do is I would like to format this data so you can see that by default, because I'm working with really big numbers, I'm working with billions and trillions here. What Excel has done is it's condensed to scientific notation. I don't love that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to right click. I'm going to click on number format. I'm going to click number. I'm going to use a comma separator. I like to use that because it helps me just when I'm looking at numbers. And I'm going to get rid of the decimal places. So you can see now that it's a nicer format. The other thing I'd like to do is just sort from largest to smallest. That's quite easy to do. Again, right click, sort largest to smallest. And now I'm starting to get a bit of information that is quite helpful. I could do something else. So if I want to do more detailed analysis, what I can do is I can select country, and now I've got the country that's making up that region number. And I can just take that region, paste it in the columns, and now I've got a table. So this is showing me all the different countries going down the left, columns across the right, which are the regions, and then subtotals for each of the regions. So you might want to look at your data in that way, and that's quite flexible as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put countries into filter and pull regions back 2 columns. Now, the reason why I'm going through this is just to show you how flexible a pivot table is. Once you've got your data in a good set, you're able to manipulate it in lots of different ways. So if you were working with someone and they wanted to see some analysis, but they weren't sure how to do it, pivot table is great. What you can do is you can sit with the person, you can just do what I'm doing here, use the different ways of cutting the data and just real time work with them and say, do you want to see it this way or that way? So that's kind of why I'm showing it that way. The other thing that I'd like to show just very quickly before the end of the video is graphs. So what you might want to do is you might want to put in a pivot chart. So if I go to pivot chart, select pivot chart, and I'm just going to go, Excel is giving me a recommendation here. It's saying based on your data, I think it should be a cluster column graph. I'm going to go with that, select OK, and then just make it a little bit bigger. So that's quite nice. That's quite a good graph. If I just go to page layout, select here, take the grids out. Now I've got a graph that's pretty good, and it's only taken me a few minutes. So what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to show you the value of a pivot graph. So if I just go back to my pivot table, and if I put a filter on it, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter based on the top 10, but because we only have a couple of regions here, I'm going to filter based on top 5. And that's the benefit of the chart. You can see there very quickly. So I've filtered my data set, and that's reflected immediately in my graph. And that's why it's powerful. That's why it's such a nice feature, because it's quite dynamic. So again, if you were working with someone and you were trying to convey a message or show them something, you could use those filters real time. You could do that while you're presenting the data, and it's quite impactful. Hopefully that's helpful. That's everything to understand and get you moving in pivot tables. There is more to it, but I just want to cover the basics to get you moving. If that's been helpful, like the video, subscribe to the channel. But also, if you have specific questions, just type them in the comments. I do read the comments. I'll pick them up, and I'll either post another video to answer the question or do an amendment to this video, whichever works. Okay, thank you.